If you spend enough time online, you'll eventually see two extreme claims about garlic and dogs. One side says, garlic is dangerous, never let your dog touch it. The other side says, garlic is natural, a small amount is actually good for dogs. And if you're a dog owner, that leaves you stuck between two very different stories. So which one is actually closer to the truth? The honest answer is, neither extreme gets the whole picture right. Garlic does have real toxic potential in dogs. That part is not a myth. Major veterinary toxicology sources such as the Merck Veterinary Manual, ASPCA Animal Poison Control, and Pet Poison Helpline all warn that garlic belongs to the allium family and can damage red blood cells in dogs and cats. But that still does not mean every tiny exposure automatically becomes a medical crisis. Risk depends on dose, form, frequency, and the individual animal. So the real question is not, is garlic always harmless? And it's also not, is any trace of garlic guaranteed to poison a dog? The better question is, what does the evidence actually support? Why so many owners swear garlic is fine? A lot of dog owners will say something like, "My dog has eaten a little garlic for years and never had any obvious problem." And to be fair, that may be completely true. Some poison control resources explicitly note that very small amounts may be safe in some animals, while larger amounts can be much more concerning. So when someone says their dog had small exposures and looked fine, that does not automatically mean they are lying, careless, or imagining things. It may simply mean the dog never crossed a threshold that caused obvious clinical signs. But this is where a very common mistake happens. People jump from, "My dog ate a little garlic and looked normal," to, "Therefore garlic is safe," and then sometimes one step further, "Therefore garlic is beneficial." Those are not the same claim. A dog showing no obvious symptoms after a small exposure does not prove garlic is helpful. It only shows that in that specific case, the exposure may not have been high enough, concentrated enough, or long enough to produce visible harm. What veterinary toxicology actually says. According to the Merck Veterinary Manual, garlic and other allium plants contain oxidizing compounds that can damage red blood cells. In dogs and cats, that damage can lead to Heinz body formation, eccentrocytosis, methemoglobinemia, and in more severe cases, hemolysis and hemolytic anemia. Merck also notes that garlic is often considered more potent than onion in this context. ASPCA Animal Poison Control also classifies garlic as toxic to dogs and cats and describes blood-related complications consistent with red blood cell damage. So yes, the toxic mechanism is real. This is not just folklore. This is recognized veterinary toxicology. But now we get to the part that people argue about the most. How strong is the real-world evidence, and how far should we generalize it? The famous study everyone argues about. One of the most known studies on this topic was published in 2000 in the American Journal of Veterinary Research. In that experiment, healthy dogs were given garlic extract by stomach tube at a dose equivalent to about 5 grams of whole garlic per kilogram of body weight per day for 7 days. The dogs developed measurable signs of oxidative injury to red blood cells, including decreases in red blood cell count, hematocrit, and hemoglobin, along with increased Heinz bodies and eccentrocytes. The authors concluded that garlic compounds have the potential to oxidize canine red blood cells. But this is also where critics of the study have a fair point. That dose was extremely high compared with what most people mean in normal life. A 10-kilogram dog in that study was getting the equivalent of about 50 grams of whole garlic a day for 7 straight days, roughly 350 grams total over the week. If you scale that by body weight to a 70-kilogram adult human, you would be talking about roughly 350 grams of garlic a day, every day, for a full week, more than 2 kilograms of garlic total. That is an extreme exposure, not a normal kitchen accident. So if someone uses that study to say, any tiny bit of garlic will definitely poison a dog, that is an overstatement. But if someone uses the same fact to say, then the study is meaningless, that is also wrong, because what the study still proves is important. Garlic compounds can cause measurable oxidative injury to canine red blood cells. This wasn't just a lab-only issue. If all we had were one high-dose experiment, people could argue this is mostly theoretical. But there's also a real clinical case report from 2005 in the Journal of the American Animal Hospital Association describing a miniature schnauzer that developed severe Heinz body hemolytic anemia after eating dumplings containing Chinese chive and garlic. That matters because it shows this is not only a lab phenomenon, it can happen in real life. Now again, we need to stay fair. That case report does not mean every dog that eats a small amount of garlic will suffer the same outcome. A case report shows that something is possible, not that it is inevitable. But it is enough to destroy the lazy argument that this only happens in unrealistic experiments. No, there are real-world cases too. Not all garlic is the same. One of the biggest problems in internet debates is that people talk about garlic as if it were one single thing, but in practice, exposure may come from fresh garlic, cooked garlic, dehydrated garlic, granulated garlic, garlic powder, garlic salt, supplements, and extracts, and those are not automatically equal in risk. The Merck Veterinary Manual notes toxicity from raw, cooked, dehydrated, and granulated forms. A newer 2025 in vitro study published in Animals compared fresh, dried, and granulated garlic on canine red blood cells and found that all could cause damage in the lab, with dried and granulated forms appearing more damaging than fresh in that model. The authors also cautioned that the study was in vitro, so it cannot be translated directly into exact real-life feeding thresholds. But it still supports the idea that more processed or concentrated forms may be more concerning. That fits what poison resources often warn about. Garlic powder, garlic salt, concentrated supplements, and similar products are not the same thing as a tiny accidental trace in ordinary food. The paper that makes this topic less one-sided. Now here's the part that people on either side often leave out. A 2018 study in BMC Veterinary Research looked at aged garlic extract, or AGE, in healthy beagles at doses of 45 or 90 milligrams per kilogram per day for 12 weeks. In that study, the researchers did not observe Heinz bodies or eccentrocytes, and they did not find obvious red blood cell toxicity under those conditions. They also reported increased expression of some antioxidant-related genes associated with NRF2 signaling. That is a real result, and it absolutely should be acknowledged. But it still does not prove that ordinary garlic is broadly safe or beneficial for dogs in general. Why not? Because this was one specific aged garlic extract at specific doses in healthy beagles over 12 weeks with a relatively small sample size. That is a much narrower claim than garlic is good for dogs. Also, the paper itself does not erase the broader toxicology literature showing that allium compounds can damage canine red blood cells in other contexts. And it is also worth noting that some of the authors were affiliated with the company connected to the aged garlic extract used in the study, which does not automatically invalidate the research, but does mean it should be interpreted with appropriate caution. So the fairest summary of that study is, a specific aged garlic extract under specific study conditions did not show obvious blood toxicity in those dogs and did affect some antioxidant-related gene expression. That still falls far short of proving that ordinary garlic is broadly safe or beneficial in real-world feeding. What about the flea and tick claims? This is one area where I would stay much firmer. A lot of owners say garlic helped with fleas, ticks, mites, skin problems, or overall health. Those stories may be sincere, but sincerity is not the same thing as good evidence. As of now, the claim that garlic is a reliable flea or tick preventive for dogs is not well supported scientifically. PetMD says there's no scientific evidence showing garlic helps ward off fleas in dogs. AKC says there's little research supporting garlic-based flea and tick products. And a 2020 veterinary evidence review reported that it found 0 peer-reviewed in vivo evidence adequate to answer whether garlic can repel, prevent, or treat flea infestation in dogs. So if someone says, "My dog ate garlic and its flea problem improved," that may be a real observation. But at this point, it should still be treated as an anecdote, not as a settled scientific fact. So how should a careful person think about this? Here is the most balanced conclusion I can give. Garlic has real toxic potential in dogs. That is supported by veterinary toxicology references, experimental evidence, and real-world clinical cases. At the same time, not every small exposure will cause obvious illness in every dog. That part is also true. The risk depends on dose, form, frequency, body size, and the individual dog. And that means if a dog has been exposed to very small amounts over time and still appears completely normal, that lowers the sense of immediate panic. but it still does not prove garlic is beneficial or safe enough to recommend on purpose or useful enough as a home remedy to outweigh the toxicology concerns. That is the key distinction. Some dogs may tolerate small amounts without obvious problems is not the same thing as garlic is a good natural remedy for dogs. So what should owners actually do? If your dog eats garlic, the first thing to understand is this: not every exposure means the same level of risk. A tiny accidental amount is not the same as a large amount. Cooked garlic in a trace amount is not the same as garlic powder, garlic salt, a supplement, or a concentrated product. And a brand new exposure is not the same as a dog that has already been eating small amounts for a long time without obvious problems. So, if the exposure is new, the practical way to think about it is simple. If the amount was clearly very small and your dog is acting completely normal, that does not automatically mean an emergency. But it still makes sense to pay attention, because garlic-related problems do not always show up immediately. Some signs may begin within the first day, while more important blood-related effects can take several days to become obvious. That means fine right now does not always mean nothing happened. In that kind of recent exposure situation, the most useful questions are: how big is the dog, what form of garlic was involved, how much was eaten, and is the dog showing any symptoms? More concentrated forms, like garlic powder, garlic salt, supplements, or heavily seasoned foods, are generally more concerning than a tiny trace in ordinary food. And one important warning here: don't improvise random internet remedies. Don't assume milk, bread, oil, or some other home trick will cancel out the exposure. And don't try to induce vomiting unless a veterinary professional specifically tells you to do that, because the right response depends on timing, dose, and the dog's condition. Now here is the other group, and this group needs a different tone. If your dog has been eating very small amounts of cooked garlic for a long time and has seemed completely normal for years, this video by itself should not suddenly make you panic. That is not the same situation as a new, larger, unknown, or concentrated exposure. In a long-term, low-dose situation like that, the point is not treat this like an emergency today. But it is also important not to swing too far the other way. Years of looking fine do not automatically prove that garlic is beneficial, proven safe, or something that should be recommended on purpose. It may only mean that the amount, form, and individual dog never crossed a visible threshold for obvious harm. That is a very different conclusion from saying garlic has been scientifically proven to help. So for owners in that long-term, my dog has always seemed fine group, the practical takeaway is not start panicking and monitor every second. It is more like this: don't treat the situation as an emergency just because of this video. Don't assume years of apparent tolerance are scientific proof of benefit. Don't escalate the habit, and be especially careful with more concentrated forms like powders, salts, or supplements. If a dog owner wants the most practical middle ground in that situation, it is simply to avoid increasing the exposure, avoid concentrated garlic products, and mention the habit at the dog's next routine veterinary visit, rather than acting as if the dog is suddenly in immediate danger because of this discussion. That is a much more realistic response than either extreme. For recent or uncertain exposures, the signs that make the situation more serious are vomiting or diarrhea that is more than mild, unusual weakness, unusual tiredness, pale gums, fast breathing, or dark reddish or brown urine. Those are the kinds of signs that can fit with red blood cell damage or anemia, and if they appear, the level of concern rises quickly. So the practical rule is this: a tiny exposure is not automatically a crisis. A long history of small cooked exposures without obvious problems is not automatically a crisis either. But neither one proves garlic is a good, proven, or broadly safe remedy for dogs. That is the middle ground most internet arguments completely miss. Final takeaway. So if you want the shortest, honest version, it's this: a small amount of garlic may not visibly harm every dog, but that does not make garlic a proven safe or beneficial natural remedy. And if someone tells you, my dog ate garlic for years and was fine, so garlic must be good, the best response is, that may be true for that dog, but it still does not settle the science in garlic's favor, because anecdote is not the same thing as evidence. And with garlic, the evidence is more mixed, narrower, and more conditional than social media usually makes it sound.
Do you have a dog or a cat? Have you ever given your pet garlic before? If you have, leave a comment and share your experience. I'd love to hear more real-world perspectives on this topic. I've also included links to the scientific sources related to this video in the description, so you can check the evidence for yourself. And if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe to support the channel.